So, as mentioned, our story today is found in the book of Numbers. But to get some context on the events we're going to read about, we're going to flip back to Exodus chapter 14 and 15. The Israelites, who have been slaves in Egypt for 400 years, are rescued and brought out by God Himself. He leads them out of Egypt, and they're on their way to the Sinai desert. As they discover that Pharaoh and his army are chasing them down to destroy them with a vengeance. So before them is the Red Sea, an ocean blocking their path, and coming up behind them are the chariots of Egypt. God says to Moses, "Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water in two, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." And of verse 17, "I will gain glory at the expense of Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory at the expense of Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." Verse 21. "Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea." Verse 27. "Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea." So God rescues the Israelites, brings out these slaves, rescues them from their enemies who were chasing after them to destroy them. And it is after this, as we stand on the opposite shore, that the people sing a song to God in gratitude and awe. In 1520, it says, "Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and she led all the women in dancing with tambourines. Miriam sang to them, 'Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea.'" So God leads his delivered people into the Sinai desert. Moses, at this point, is the leader of the Israel people. During this time, his older brother, Aaron, is also a leader. If you recall the story, Aaron was serving as Moses' helper when Moses went up against Pharaoh in Egypt. And Aaron later becomes a Levitical priest and the high priest among the people. The brothers, as we said, are joined by Miriam. Now, Miriam is Moses' older sister, who is also a leader among the Israelites. So this is a sibling trio, if you will, the leadership team made up of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Now, something happens while they are all in the desert, and we're going to read this story in Numbers chapter 12. Let's begin from verse 1. "Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Ethiopian wife, for he had married an Ethiopian. 'Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?' they asked. 'Hasn't he also spoken through us?' And the Lord heard this." So in this scene, there is some whispering going on. There's some talking. Now, the English text says that Miriam and Aaron are doing the talking, but in Hebrew, the feminine singular verb that initiates the chapter lets a Hebrew reader know and signals to them that Miriam is the one leading out this conversation. She's the main person talking, the main person driving it forward. And what does Miriam have to say? Well, she begins talking against Moses because of his Ethiopian wife. You may have noticed this, but in a single sentence, the fact that Zipporah is Ethiopian is said twice in a single sentence. Now, this right here is a commonly used Hebrew literary method. If a word is repeated twice, for example, it's a tool to bring the reader's attention to something. It's a signal. This is important. Take note of this. This is central to what is happening. And you can find other examples throughout the Bible, as you can see on the list, where God calls people by their name. By the burning bush, he addresses Moses as Moses, Moses. He does the same with Abraham, the same with Jacob, the same with Samuel, Martha, and so on. So, similarly, we are being signaled to by the author of Numbers to the fact that Moses' wife is an Ethiopian, and this is central to the plot of what's happening. And it seems central as well to Miriam talking behind Moses' back and against her, for this text says, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Ethiopian wife, for he had married an Ethiopian. What she then goes on to say, what Miriam then goes on to say is, hasn't God spoken to us as well? He's not only spoken to Moses. Well, as we read, Miriam has been talking and the Lord heard. So this happens in verse 3. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. So the three of them went out. Okay, so the Lord heard Miriam, and now he is calling three siblings out, saying, come to the tent of meeting, all three of you. Now, the tent of meeting, otherwise called the tabernacle in other places, was referring to the tent where God lived. He lived in the middle of his people in the camp which they were living in the desert. And God says, come out to the tent which I live in. Verse 5. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So God is putting Miriam and Aaron here on the spot. He says, when I speak to a prophet, I show them visions, I show them dreams, but Moses, now Moses and I are close. We speak like friends face to face. Why do you think that it's okay to be gossiping about his wife and talking against him? Now, there are those who interpret this story as being all about jealousy. Jealousy from Miriam and Aaron against their youngest brother Moses, because they think, why should he be in charge? Haven't we also been given responsibility? And they are jealous because of his position. Some say that Miriam and Aaron wanted his leadership position, and that's why they're talking the way they are. So they say this isn't really about who Moses married, it's about sibling rivalry and the want for power. But to come to this conclusion is to miss the driving point of the text. And also, if you remember what the author is trying to bring our attention to, what he is saying, this is what is happening. This is the core of it. And as we already said, the author is pulling attention to Moses' wife and the fact that she is Ethiopian. Secondly, the text says Miriam was talking against Moses because of his Ethiopian wife. In other words, there is no way around this. There's no getting away from the uncomfortable reality of this story. Miriam is attacking Moses for having married an Ethiopian, not an Israelite. Miriam is talking against Moses because she's being racist against his wife. Now we may say, why is she then talking about God has talked to her and Aaron as well? Like saying, hey, we're a big deal too. Well, we can understand the following points from this. Number one, Miriam's racism is the root of her attack against Moses. Number two, the fact that she brings up her and Aaron's importance, as in that God has talked to them as well, demonstrates that Miriam is using the special connection, the spiritual superiority, as a defense to back up her racist attack on Zipporah. Miriam is rationalizing her own racism by saying, hey, God spoke to me. He used me in a powerful way. God is on my side, clearly. And that wouldn't be the first time in history that someone has claimed God's allegiance as a defense for their racism. And number three, Miriam connecting her own status with Moses' wife doesn't show a lack of racism in this text, but the stupidity of racism, because racial bias makes no sense. And no matter what people may argue, there's no reasonable foundation in reality. It makes these giant leaps in order to justify itself, in order to hold together its ridiculous arguments. Things like, oh, I don't like this group of people because they take all our jobs. Or, oh, I feel unnerved or worried around people with this skin color because ... So, to those who reduce the story in Numbers 13 to one thing, a fight for leadership, they have missed the point entirely of what's happening here, because racial prejudice is so illogical, unreasonable. It has no basis in reality, is utter nonsense. And any racist comment will always be foolish. It will always be off topic. It will always be missing the point. And this, after all, is what systemic racism is even till today about. It's a hateful, nonsensical idea that lacks logic, reason, or sanity. And God seems to not be interested in being quiet about this. He has something to say about this. Let's read from verse 9. The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. God doesn't have a passive reaction or a positive reaction to Miriam's racism. He doesn't stand back and say nothing. Verse 10. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease, and he said to Moses, "Please, my Lord, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away." Now talk about irony. First, God said to Miriam and Aaron in front of that tent, "Look, I'm on Moses' side. We speak face to face. We're close. How could you speak about him and his wife in this way?" God's reaction to Miriam is a disease which is considered in those days to make a person unclean, thus saying your racial prejudice is connected to and has made you unclean. And as if God couldn't put things more on the nose, he says, you attack Moses' wife for her skin color. Here, you have never been more white in your life. Miriam is made leprous, which is a skin disease, which in the later stages of the disease turns your skin bright white. Now, Aaron hurries to say that we're sorry to Moses for what we've done and says, please help Miriam. Don't let her be like this. Don't let her die like this. And Moses very patiently and lovingly cries out to God for help. Please, God, heal her. Verse 14. The Lord replied to Moses, if her father had spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she was brought back. So Moses says, God, please heal her. And God replies with this rather unusual metaphor. And just to explain, in those days, in that culture, there was a customary signaling of your shame of someone, or your disapproval of something, or your disgust of something. And that would be by spitting. Now, I am half Lebanese, and I can say that in that part of the world, this tradition is still upheld in a form. If you feel disgusted at something, or you want to take distance from it, you might spit at the ground. You might spit in the direction of the person who is disgusting you. So God is not saying that he wants to spit in anyone's face, but he's using a metaphor of the culture, saying, look, in those days, if a father was to spit even in the direction of his daughter, she would be in disgrace for 7 days. And he's saying, I'm disgusted and disgraced by her racism. Yes, I will help her and forgive her, but she needs to be kept outside the camp for a week. So Miriam is brought outside the camp, and she almost goes on a little timeout, a little holiday. Now, this reflects what the Lord had commanded the Israelites while in the desert. He said, to protect you from contagious diseases, if anyone, for example, gets leprosy, go outside the camp and stay away from other people so they don't catch it too, till you are healed or you get better. And in the same way, Miriam has to go and live outside the camp for this week getaway. And after 7 days, God heals her and she is admitted back into the community, back into the camp. Now, as modern day readers, this story may seem a bit shocking at first when we read it. But there is a reason why there is a strong scene, a strong message is being conveyed in these events. And that message is, God won't stand for racism. Now, some may be rather shocked at that Miriam, of all people, was being racist. After all, she was kind of a big deal in that setting. Let's quickly summarize and have a look at who Miriam was. Number one, she was leader of Israel. She's even referred to that later on in Micah 6:4. And in today's setting, if you want to sort of modernize it, she would have been maybe head elder, or at least a leader in the church. This is a sibling church leadership group. Number two, she was the sister of Moses. And Moses is called the most humble man on earth, the leader of God's own people, a man who sees God face to face. And she is that person's sister. Number three, Miriam is called a prophetess. She is a prophet. God speaks to her and through her. Number four, Miriam's history is actually quite heroic. When she was young, she was very brave and followed the basket, carrying her baby brother to safety along the River Nile. And she was there watching over him. So she is a protecting big sister. And finally, Miriam is a song leader in Israel. She leads the people in music and praising. She is Israel's worship leader, if you will. So she's a prophet, a leader, an elder, a worship leader, and she's still racist. You can be a song leader and still be racist. You can be a leader of the people of God and still be racist. You can be a prophet and still be racist. You can be the aunt of 2 nephews who have darker skin than you and still be racist against their mother. Today, you can be a pastor, an elder, a deacon, a theologian, sister of the GC president, the best worship leader in the world, and still be racist. Now, if there's anything we should be learning from the present events in our society, from the anti-racist movement, Black Lives Matter, it is how important it is to not assume Oh, I'm fine. I don't have those thoughts. How easy it is to give into our own hatred without realizing it. And how important it is to seek honesty and information about our own way of thinking and how that thinking unfolds. It is so easy to think, well, I'm not that racist monster everyone's railing against. The problem isn't me. We may say the following, but I love my family. I love my family member who married a foreigner. I am a Christian. You might even say, but I myself come from a difficult background as a minority. Well, Miriam did too. She was a racial minority and came from a background of great hardship and slavery. We might say, but I serve God. God has spoken to me. God has led me. Yes, these things may be true, and you can still be entertaining racist thoughts. Now, God's strong reaction and punishment of Miriam reveals the deadly seriousness of racism in his eyes. And although in this story we find God not giving room for racial prejudice and hatred, not even when it's whispered behind people's backs, we find him making room for someone to change, someone to come back to him and back to his mercy. And as we maybe look today at our own biases, because we all have them, the inherited structures of our parents, our grandparents, our society, ways we have been taught to think, we find this invitation, an invitation to change, to grow by listening, by understanding and choosing something better. A chance to escape from the deadly and corrupt and ugly nature of racism, which God says there is no room for that among my people. We find, despite all this, that there may even be hope for someone like Miriam, the song leader who was racist, because of God, defender of the oppressed, and maker and lover of all people.